take a seat. We're going to start the block. Welcome to Southern California JSA 2017's first expert panel. We have two distinguished guests with us today, here to discuss the topic of reducing gun violence, principles, pragmatism, and personal connections. We are proud to welcome both Charles Blek of the Brady Campaign to End Gun Violence and Dr. John Lott of the Crime Prevention Research Center here with us today to share their opinions and to share some statistics, and then to take audience questions. The format for this panel will run as follows. Each presenter will have a 15-minute time segment to present their presentation and their views. After that, we will move to a question and answer session. The questions that will receive priority will be the ones that were submitted before the convention on the question submission link. After that, if time permits, we will take questions from the audience. If you don't have an opportunity to ask your question, keep in mind that if you signed up for GEL, the topic and the discussion of this panel can be continued on that platform during the weekend and after the weekend as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome our first panelist. Mr. Charles Blek began his work in gun violence prevention in the spring of 1995 with the founding of Orange County Citizens for the Prevention of Gun Violence, dedicated to the memory of his 21-year-old son Matthew, who was killed by young teens attempting to rob him with a small handgun known as a Saturday night special. Mr. Blek completed his undergraduate education at the University of Southern California and received a doctorate in law from Loyola Law School in 1972. The Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, with which he works, was named in honor of Jim and Sarah Brady. Jim, then press secretary for President Ronald Reagan, was seriously wounded during an attempt on the president's life. He and his wife Sarah helped create the latest national grassroots organization to work for the prevention of gun violence. Mr. Blek was the founding president of the California chapters of the Brady Campaign and currently serves as president of the Orange County chapter. He has been honored for his work by Loyola Law School, Gifford Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, the Brady Center, the Violence Prevention Coalition of Los Angeles, and the Violence Prevention Coalition of Orange County. And this past May, he received the Brady Lifetime Achievement Award in Washington, D.C. It is our pleasure to hear Mr. Blek present. We welcome him now for a 15-minute presentation on gun control.
You are our future, and that's why I enjoy the opportunity to be here. At the risk of full disclosure, you do know this is rivalry week. I am a mixed marriage. It will be 50 years this coming June that I've been married, and my lovely wife is a graduate of UCLA. And you know that I'm a graduate of USC. I like to tell my wife that I lifted her up, and she tells people she earned her degree and I bought mine. That's why we lasted almost 50 years. Anyway, you have a fascinating topic. I personally don't care for the word control. I don't like to be controlled. I don't care for the word. My wife and I have spent our time working for responsible gun policies. And what we're going to do today is there's going to be an agenda I have. I'll try to stay on topic. And I have some do's and don'ts. My don'ts will be that I will not chase misstatements and myths. There are several handouts we have up here, which I'll refer as I go through this. And the first one is hot off the press from Johns Hopkins. I always have trouble with John. They have a concealed carry of firearms, facts versus fiction. 2 days ago it was published. excellent. It's 12 pages. If you want to Google it, it has sites, it has citations. It's an excellent discussion. More importantly, the do's that I'm going to have is I want to talk about the parameters of the Constitution. I noticed the heading was pragmatism, so I want to talk about a new program called Speak for Safety. And finally, since you are here basically in Orange County, we're going to have 4 very interesting congressional races coming up. The 39th, the 45th, the 48th, and the 49th. Did I do that right, Kathy? Okay, good. All right. And we'll talk a little bit about H.R. 38, which is the NRA proposal for reciprocity on concealed weapons. So, the Constitution, and this is an excellent printout. It's from smartgunlaws.org. It will tell us about the Scalia decision in 2008 in Heller, and it will tell us that basically that decision was you had a right to an operable handgun in your home for self-defense, period. Justice Scalia also went out and told us that it does not mean that you have the right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatsoever purpose. And I think that's an important caveat. In that particular decision, Justice Scalia did tell us that there are a number of constitutional areas that we can work within that framework. He told us that we can prohibit possession by felons and mentally ill. He told us we can prohibit guns in sensitive places, such as schools and government buildings. I also find it fascinating that the NRA convention doesn't allow guns on the floor of their national convention, even though they have carry permit people. Oh, it is too, John? Come on. John, I'll listen to you very politely. All right? Regulate commercial sales, they ban dangerous and unusual weapons, and they regulate storage. What's important within that framework is that in California, from 1995 to present, 1993 to 2015, we have reduced our gun mortality rate in California by 57%. And to put that in a proper context, that's more than twice the national level of the other states. So we have #1 laws in California. We're categorized as the strongest gun laws, and while we get accused of feel-good laws, it does feel good that we've reduced that gun mortality rate, that percentage, and it shows what we do in California works. Our issue is that, unfortunately, we border Nevada and Arizona and some of the other states that create issues for us in our particular enforcements. So this is an excellent printout for you about how California laws do in fact work. More importantly, let me get onto the pragmatic side of the charge that I have today. You may or may not remember a few years ago that terrible shooting of the UC Santa Barbara, Isla Vista. A number of students were killed. The parents of that young man, that 21-year-old, actually contacted the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department. They went out and investigated, and at the time, there's only something called a 5150, which is a psychiatric hold, or adjudicated as mentally ill, and they decided that young man did not rise to either one of those particular situations. They were actually en route to Santa Barbara when he exploded and caused all that havoc and killed all those folks. Based on that genesis, we now have a program called Speak for Safety. It is a gun violence restraining order. And if nothing else, I hope that you take this with you. I hope your counselors at your school become aware of it because of you. I hope you educate your friends, and so on. Speakforsafety.org. What it boils down to is January 1, 2016. We passed and it became effective in California. It is a civil action. So the first thing you have to understand is if you're involved or a friend or a loved one is involved, it's not a criminal proceeding, it's a civil action. You also have to understand it's patterned after domestic violence, however, it is not personal restraint, it is specifically focused on removing the gun. There is something called an ex parte application where you go to the courthouse, the clerk's office, fill out, and law enforcement, I would suggest law enforcement serve it, where they can specifically remove the gun, get it out of the equation. 21 days to start with, and then there's a hearing, and it can be extended for up to a year, and we go from there. It gives you a cooling off period. It gives you an opportunity to have that person receive appropriate counseling. More importantly, it reduces the lethalness of the situation. If we had that law enforced and we had an opportunity to be on panels with Lieutenant Schway of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, who basically told us if that law had been in effect, they would have disarmed that young man and those lives would have been saved. So we're talking about saving your life or your friend's life very, very specifically, especially in campus proceedings. So, Speak for Safety. SpeakForSafety.org. Okay. It prohibits an individual from possessing and purchasing guns and ammo. Who can apply for it? A family member or law enforcement. So in the case of the Santa Barbara shooting, those parents could have made an application to the Superior Court, could have obtained that restraining order, and could have had the law enforcement folks disarm their son before he went on his rampage. Oh, we're in good shape. We're in good shape. All right. Let's see. The philosophy is very simple, folks. You can always return a gun. You cannot give back a life. So SpeakForSafety.org. The final comments I have this morning deal with the number one philosophy this year apparently of the NRA called H.R. 38, which is a concealed carry reciprocity bill of 2017. You go to the Johns Hopkins report and they talk extensively about concealed weapons. They talk about myths and misstatements. More importantly, what you need to understand is in California, we are a state that has, we call our state a made issue. You have to show that you have a background check, training, you are interviewed by law enforcement, and you have to show good cause. And it's not automatic. It's up to the law enforcement as to whether they're going to allow you to have a gun concealed, carried in our state. There are a lot of states that they call shall issue, and there are some states where they are called constitutional carry, where there's real no standards at all. No background check, no training. In fact, in some states, folks with criminal backgrounds have the ability to apply and obtain concealed carry permits. That's extremely important because in California, we have the discretion. If this bill becomes law, we have to abide by the law of that other state. We lose control over who can be armed and carried in our streets and in our communities. Now, one of the favorite arguments of the National Rifle Association is it's just like a driver's license. No, wrong. In a driver's license, that's a state-by-state interaction. California negotiates with Nevada or Arizona or any other state as to what their standards are, whether we feel their standards meet our particular training that we want for people driving on our streets. If this bill passes, and it's a state-to-state situation, we control our own destiny here in California. If this bill passes, then a federal mandate comes down, and we are required to handle and recognize the law of this other state as our law. It's like a race to the bottom. So, understanding that you have a number of interesting political situations here in Orange County. In fact, you have 4 races coming up that, in talking with a number of people, you're more than aware of the 39th, 45th, 48th, and 49th races. H.R. 38 has all been endorsed by incumbents in those particular races, and I anticipate that they will be an issue in the upcoming election. So I hope you become involved, I hope you become educated, and whichever side you end up on, you speak with facts. And it's been, again, a real pleasure to be in here this morning, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
that, one brief announcement. On the JS app, the form to submit questions is available in the resources section. If you would like to submit a question, please submit it through that pathway, and it will be reviewed. And if your question is relevant, pertinent, and appropriate, it will get priority over questions that are just from the audience, because that allows us to vet the questions before they're asked. So, if you'd like to ask a question within the time frame of this panel, you should probably submit it on the app. Thank you. Now, I would like to welcome our second panelist. Dr. John R. Lott, Jr. is an economist and a world-recognized expert on guns and crime. He has held research or teaching positions at various academic institutions, including the University of Chicago, Yale University, the Wharton School, Stanford University, and was the chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission during 1988 to 1989. He is currently a contributor to Fox News and the Hill newspaper, and he holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. Please keep it down. Dr. Law is a prolific author for both academic and popular publications. He's published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed academic journals and written 9 books, including the best-selling More Guns, Less Crimes, The Bias Against Guns, and Freedomnomics. His most recent books are The War on Guns and Dumbing Down the Courts, How Politics Keep the Smartest Judges Off the Bench. Nobel laureate Milton Friedman noted that Dr. John Lott has few equals as a perceptive analyst of controversial public policy issues. He has been one of the most productive and cited economists in the world. During 1969 to 2000, he ranked 26th worldwide in terms of quality-adjusted total academic journal output and 4th in terms of total research output. His research is currently the 28th most downloaded in the world, and he is a frequent writer of opinion editorials. It is our extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Lott to our convention, and we hope you will give him your undivided attention and respect during this 15-minute presentation period.
Thanks very much. I'm honored to be here. I can't claim quite the pedigree that the previous speaker had, but I got my undergraduate and PhD from UCLA. And I went back and taught at UCLA for a while, so I have a little bit of Southern California. Anyway, when we get this started. So, I don't know if people can see this. Okay, so anybody who's read my research knows that I think police are extremely important. I think police are probably the single most important factor for reducing crime. But I think one thing the police understand themselves is that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occur. And that raises the question, what should people do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves? And what you find, and I'm happy to go through this in more detail later, is that by far the safest course of action for people to take when they're confronted by a criminal is to have a gun. It's much safer than behaving passively, and it's much safer than any other forms of active resistance that people can take. There are 2 groups of people who benefit the most from having guns. One group are the people most likely to be victims of violent crime. That overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas. And the other group are people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. When a woman is attacked almost always by a male, there's a larger strength differential that exists there between the woman and the male than when one guy is attacking another guy. And the presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in her ability to go and resist an attack than it does for the man. You know, there's so much that has been misplaced in this, and I'll try to go through some of this as we go through, but just to give you one example. After each of the mass public shootings, including the most recent ones, people call for background checks on private transfers, these so-called universal background checks. And yet, in not one single mass public shooting over at least the last 2 decades would one of these attacks have been stopped if that type of law had been in effect. You know, there are all sorts of false claims and kind of scare tactics about things that might happen if people are allowed to have guns. I'll just give you one brief example in the discussion that we just had. He was making a distinction between the 42 states that are so-called right to carry states, and California, which is one of the states that have so-called may issue laws. It's not true for the whole state, in fact. There are different counties in California which effectively act as right to carry, and one of those counties is Orange County. The sheriff here in Orange County, whatever reason you want to give, if it's just for self-defense, or if it's for business or something else, the sheriff will now accept that. It's been a change over the last couple of years. I assume people in Orange County aren't feeling particularly dangerous, more so than maybe other parts of the state, because that's been allowed. Okay, so what do police and academics believe? One can go and point to one particular academic or a couple or whatever, but what about in general? There's a couple surveys of police. There's actually lots of them that show similar results, but I'll just talk about two of the largest ones. One by Police One. It's the largest private organization of police in the country. They have about 450,000 members. 380,000 of those are full-time active law enforcement. The other 70,000 are retired. Another survey is by the National Association of Chiefs of Police, which surveyed 3,200 of its members. And there's surveys of criminologists and economists. I don't know, I didn't know how one could read this, but if you look at the survey by Police One, they say, considering past recent mass shootings in Newtown and Aurora and other similar places, do you think legally armed citizens could have made a difference? And of the choices, 80% of police officers who were surveyed said casualties would likely have been reduced. Another 6% said that they believed that the casualties could have been completely eliminated if somebody had been allowed to have a concealed handgun present at the time. Another question for police is, do you support arming teachers and other school administrators who volunteer to carry at their schools? In this case, 76% of law enforcement officers from around the country felt that that would make things safe. What do you believe is the biggest causes of gun violence in the United States? You can go through the different things, but only 4% of police officers thought easy access to guns made things more dangerous. In the 2016 survey of the National Association of Chiefs of Police, here's one of their questions. Can qualified law-abiding citizens help law enforcement reduce violent criminal activity? 76% of police chiefs and sheriffs from around the country thought that that would be helpful. Here's some surveys from economists and criminologists. I'm not going to go through it all carefully, but they ask questions like, do people use guns defensively to stop crime more frequently than to commit crime? You have more than a 2-to-1 difference there by economists and criminologists who say that there's a benefit. Does concealed carry reduce crime? By a 3-to-1 difference, economists and criminologists thought that allowing permitted concealed handguns is more likely to reduce crime than have no effect, and by a 6-to-1 difference in terms of reducing relative increasing. Questions on suicide, on background checks, on other things. Overwhelmingly, academics from across the board who have actually done research in these areas don't think it will be beneficial. Okay, how do police differ on gun control? I'm not going to really go through this for the time, but there's a whole range of issues that one can look at in terms of waiting periods, assault weapons ban. Here's assault weapons ban. 71% of police say it will have no effect. Over 20% said it will actually have a bad effect. Here's ammunition for magazine size. Over 90% say they will have no beneficial impact. Waiting periods, other types of things. So here's the National Association of Chiefs of Police saying that will your department support nationwide reciprocity, which is essentially what was just being talked about. Almost 87% of police chiefs and sheriffs say that national reciprocity will help reduce crime. It's even a larger percentage for police. Now, there's different types of data, and I'm just going to try to go through this quickly. Often when you hear discussions, people use what's called cross-sectional data. They'll point to different places at one point in time. A typical example would be with regard to the UK, where they'll say, look, the UK has relatively few homicides, has strict gun control, so it must be, compared to the United States, so it must be because of those strict laws that they have a low homicide rate. what I would point out as an economist is that they had an even lower homicide rate before they had the gun control laws. They have a low homicide rate despite the gun control laws rather than because of that. And so what most academics do, overwhelmingly, they look at what's called panel data, where you follow lots of places over time to see how they change before and after they change their gun control laws, and to see how they're changing relative to other places. And they control for more than just one type of law. So for example, when a comparison was just being made with California, you can neglect to mention things like the 3 strikes bill that had been passed shortly before the period of time that he was looking at, and other types of things, and there are other issues that one can have on that. Here's just a graph of homicide rates across the world. The United States is the bar in red. You can see the green one is for the median, and the blue is the average. I will mention that many of the worst countries don't even report their homicide rates. So some of the worst ones aren't even there. Now, this is for firearm homicides. If you can see, the United States moves up quite a bit. It's red there. But there's a simple reason for that, and one has to be careful when you hear comparisons of firearm homicides, and that is over 40% of the countries in the world don't report firearm homicides. And the reason why we move up relative to the other countries isn't because we're relatively bad, it's because 40% of the countries, overwhelmingly the bad countries, even some of the developed countries, only report homicides and don't report firearm homicides. If you look at just comparisons of gun ownership rates and homicide rates across countries, in fact, you find that the countries with the most guns, which is the bottom line there, have the fewest homicides. And you can look at it for firearm homicides. Again, the line there kind of shows you the relationship. And I can talk to you for an hour about the problems with this. And this is just looking for developed countries. This isn't even including countries like Mexico or Brazil or Russia, which would make it even much more of a negative relationship that would be there. If you look at all the developed countries or all the countries in the world, you find that. But again, cross-sectional comparisons aren't very useful. I'm just bringing them up because that's what people usually always focus on when they have this discussion. I'm saying even if you take that, you still get the opposite results. But it's very difficult to control the differences across countries when you just look at purely cross-section. In the United States, the redder it is, the more murders that you have. 2% of the counties in the United States account for over half the murders in the United States. And if you ever see a murder map of those counties, usually about anything from 8 to 10 blocks in those counties literally account for more than half the murders in those counties. So murders in the United States are extremely heavily concentrated in very tiny areas, and that overwhelmingly has to do because of drug gangs. Now, looking at crime over time, I'm just going to try to go through this quickly. Let me just ask you a question. Can you name one place in the world that's banned guns, either all guns or all handguns, and seen murder rates go down? Australia? I can go through Australia, but Australia, first of all, didn't ban guns. You have to get licenses for it. You can still get semi-automatic guns in Australia, but there's no country that you can find that's had a gun ban in Australia. I have time, I'll go through that. So anyway, here's Chicago, here's Washington, D.C. You can see before their handgun ban in '97, their violent crime rate, their homicide rate was falling relative to other places that it rose. This is Chicago, generally falling before their handgun ban in November 1982, and then generally rising afterwards. You can look around the world. This is Ireland. These are island nations that you would think would be the ideal experiment here. Ireland, when they banned guns in 1972, you can see the huge increases that occurred in murder rates and homicide rates afterwards. Here's Jamaica in 1975 that they had it. And this is the UK, which banned handguns in January 1997. So 50% increase over the next 8 years, and it only fell after that because they had a 14% increase in the number of police within 2 years, 18% increase in the number of police in 4 years. So why do we see this? Well, the reason why you see this is because when you ban guns, it's the most law-abiding good citizens who obey them, not the criminals. And then just because you brought up Australia, I'm going to try to go through this quickly. Australia had a gun buyback in 96 and 97. They reduced the number of legally owned guns from about 3.2 to 2.2 million. Since then, though, people have been able to go buy guns. In 2015, there were 5.8 million guns in Australia. It was much higher than it was before. So if this is right, you should have seen an immediate drop and then an increase over time in gun violence. That's not what you observe. Here, you can look at the bottom one. This is for suicides for guns. The drop rate, the regression line on the top there shows you how firearm suicides were falling before the buyback. They were actually falling at a faster rate than they were afterward. There was no big drop and then an increase. It continued falling, though at a slower rate afterward. Here's for firearm homicides. In the 15 years prior to the buyback, firearm homicides were falling. They actually fell at a slower rate after the buyback than they did before. And there's no big drop and then an increase as you would expect with that. Now there's lots of gun control laws that we can talk about here. And I just mentioned the background check system. I guess I got about a minute and a half. Here's the deal. We all want to try to keep criminals from getting guns. The problem is that the current system is a complete mess. In Washington, D.C., we talked about universal background checks, which was mentioned earlier. In Washington, D.C., it costs $175 to privately transfer a gun. In Oregon, which is the cheapest other state, it's $55. Now, you and I may be able to afford $175 to privately transfer a gun, but that's a real tax. And the people that my research and other research finds who benefit the most from having the ability to protect themselves, poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas, may be priced out of legally owning a gun because of a $175 tax that you put on them. When you hear 2.5 million dangerous, prohibited people that have been stopped from having a gun because of background checks, that's simply false. What they should say is that there have been 2.5 million initial denials, and almost all of those were mistakes. Okay, well, that started. Okay, so here's the deal. Why, if you look at it, the last year that the full NICS data was available was 2010. The Obama administration started putting it out after that. 73,000 denials. 28 federal cases were prosecuted, 13 convictions. Why the gap? Because they got the wrong person. Those aren't real cases. It wasn't like the Obama administration didn't want to prosecute people. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because a name similar to felon buy a gun. And it's racially biased because the people that they overwhelmingly stop are blacks and Hispanics.
Thank you, Dr. Lott, for your presentation. At this point, I will ask everybody to take a seat because we are going to move as quickly as possible through the panel discussion. I will briefly read the rules of engagement for the panel section. First, I will appoint a timekeeper. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to serve as timekeeper? Come in. Can both speakers see come in the front row there? Excellent. So the rules are as follows. We will alternate between speakers. Questions submitted on the Google form that was available on the app and before the convention. The speaker to whom a question is targeted will have 60 seconds to answer the question. The other speaker, if necessary, will have a 30-second response time. To questions targeted to both speakers, each speaker will have 60 seconds to respond to the question, and then the original speaker, if necessary, will have a 30-second period of rebuttal. So, we will get started with that. There are 2 handheld mics on the tables for our speakers. And I will begin with the questions that were submitted on the form. All right. So, beginning with Dr. Lott. So, Dr. Lott, within your book, you argue that the more armed the population is in the United States, the lower the crime rate. As both presentations mentioned, the United States has more than double the rate of gun ownership than any other country and a violent crime rate far above average. What do you think will be the turning point at which the percentage of people in the country is high enough to start deterring crime instead of increasing it?
Thank you very much for the question. Look, I mean, there are a lot of false things in that question. So, for example, the United States doesn't have above average violent crime rate. We have about half the violent crime rate of the UK. Most of Europe has double the violent crime rate. You can look this up. There's something called the International Crime Victimization Survey. It's done by the UN. And Australia, for example, has a violent crime rate that's about 60% higher than the violent crime rate that we have in the United States. Most of the rest of the world has a violent crime rate that's much higher than we have here in the United States. What we have is a relatively high murder rate compared to many developed countries, but not all developed countries. There's some developed countries that have higher murder rates than we have here in the United States. But as I mentioned before, we have one particular unusual problem for murder rates, and that has to be illegal drug gangs. And the issue is, how long do we have for questions?
160 seconds. Speaker's time has elapsed. Mr. Blek, would you like to respond?
We have almost as many guns in this country as we have people. If more guns made us safer, we would be the politest country in the world, and obviously that's not factual. The Johns Hopkins survey has 3 major points here. Right to carry laws appear to increase violent crime. Civilians rarely use concealed guns to defend themselves from criminals. And the National Crime Victimization Survey data indicates no clear safety benefit to using a gun defense during a criminal attack. I would refer you to the Johns Hopkins survey.
Speaker's time is elapsed. Now a question for Mr. Blek. Mr. Blek, because our neighboring states have less restrictive gun laws, do you believe that continuing to restrict gun ownership in California will make Californians more susceptible to gun violence perpetrated by guns acquired in other states? 60 seconds.
Obviously, our goal is to reduce gun violence altogether. One of the difficulties in this particular discussion is that reducing gun violence also includes suicides and unintentional, not just criminal. And 60% of our gun violence deals with suicides. So we have to look at an overall picture or we get skewed results. I'm pleased with California with our gun mortality reduction, and I'm hopeful that it'll catch on at the federal level and these other states will use the pattern that we've created here in California. Thank you.
Dr. Lott, would you like to respond?
Look, I mean, it's a continuation of the first question. Police are important, but police can't be there all the time. The question is, what should people do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves? And, you know, you can point to the people at the Bloomberg School of Public Health that he wants to point to. But if you look across academics as a whole, as I showed you with the survey for people who go and work on this, it's overwhelmingly the other direction. Whether you look at suicides, there are lots of ways for people to commit suicide, close substitutes for people to commit suicide. And what you find is that the more people have to be able to defend themselves, you can deter criminals just you can deter them with higher arrest rates or higher convictions.
Speaker's time has elapsed. We will move to a question for both speakers, 60 seconds apiece, beginning with Dr. Lott. What role do you believe that addressing mental health should play in addressing gun violence in America? 60 seconds.
Well, like mental health, sure, we'd like to try to do something, but what you have to realize is that the people in the mental health field know their limits. If you look at the mass public shootings during this new Obama administration, over half the people, including the one in Santa Barbara, were seeing mental health care experts before they engaged in their attack. And not in one single case did any of those mental health care experts, including the one in Santa Barbara, have any mental health care expert who viewed them as a danger to themselves or a danger to somebody else. You can go back over the last couple decades and you see the same thing. There's a whole literature in academic psychology and psychiatry that you can look at yourself where they talk about their complete inability to identify these individuals. You know, it'd be nice if there was something simple that you could go and do, but if the people in the area say that they can't identify these individuals beforehand, then you have to ask yourself what's the alternative. And the alternative is to let people defend themselves when you fail in stopping those people from being able to go and stop.
Speaker's time has elapsed. Mr. Blek, 60 seconds. What role do you believe mental health should play in addressing gun violence?
Well, the first thing we have to recognize is roughly only 4% of mentally ill people have, in fact, tendencies for violence. So we're talking about a very small majority, very small amount. More importantly, responsible gun policies and mental health treatment are not mutually exclusive items. They can work together, and they should work together. The bottom line is that with our Speak for Safety, for example, that young man was not raised to a 5150 or adjudicated as mentally ill, but removing the guns from his possession would have saved those lives at UC Santa Barbara. Please review the speakforsafety.org. Please utilize it. You're going to save lives with it. Thank you.
Please respect the speaker. Also, please hold your applause at the end of questions, just so we can move through as many as possible. You can do one clap if you'd like. Dr. Lott, you have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like. Thank you. We will move to a question for Mr. Blek. Mr. Blek, in areas with significantly restricted gun control policies and high homicide rates, what do you propose is the safest course of action for somebody who wants to stay law-abiding but is concerned about danger in the area? 60 seconds. There you go, 60 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm an old man, I lost track of your question.
The question is, for somebody living in a high crime area with significant gun restrictions, who wants to be law-abiding but also wants to keep themselves safe, what course of action would you recommend?
Well, we have to understand that we need to address this in an overall situation. There's anecdotes, but the statistics tell us that if they want a right to carry a permit, that in California they go through the appropriate training, but they also have to understand that right to carry laws appears to increase violent crime in these particular areas, and this is from Stanford, UC Berkeley, and Columbia researchers. So the bottom line is that I would hope that they would become politically active and convince our legislators that we have to approach in a universal manner, and so that we can apply all of our good California laws to all sections. Thank you.
All right, 30 seconds to respond, Dr. Lott.
Look, there's over 4 dozen peer-reviewed academic studies by economists, criminologists, law professors. One unpublished study that he's pointing to claims that there's a bad effect in terms of murder and violent crime. Out of all the published studies in peer-reviewed journals, over 2/3 of them claim that there's a reduction in violent crime from people being able to go and carry permanent concealed handguns, and the other 30% claim that there's no effect. None of those published studies find a bad effect in terms of murder, rape, or robbery. The debate is between how much it benefits versus the other.
Thank you, Dr. Lott. The next question is for Dr. Lott, and I just lost what it is. Oh, here it is. Sorry. You stated a lot of research statistics on the opinion of police. Is there any empirical evidence in the research based on how the majority of people feel about gun control, and why do you believe we should give additional weight to the views of policemen on this issue?
Well, I think one of the reasons we're giving weight to police is because they're deeply involved in crime. They see firsthand what happens with regard to it. And there are lots of surveys that have done police over decades that show very similar effect, including the ones that are over the last few years. Look, you have these surveys that are done on the population immediately after some type of attack that's occurred, and it has a big effect on people's views temporarily. But if you look generally over time, a couple decades ago, most people wanted to ban handguns. That's a very small percentage right now and feel the same way. A couple decades ago, a lot of people wanted to go and do assault weapons bans. The surveys that you've seen recently on that show something like 30% or so. You know, these surveys that go and say background checks, where they say 90% of people want these background checks on private transfers, when it's actually come to a vote, they barely get 50% or less. Last year they had 2 initiatives on the ballot in Nevada and in Maine. In Maine it lost. Nevada won by less than 0.5%, or a little over 0.5%.
Thank you.
And that's despite Bloomberg spending 6 times more than his vote.
All right, we will move to one last question. I'm sorry, but we're running very short on time. So this will be our last question. If you have additional questions, please continue the discussion on gel. The question is for both speakers. We've talked a lot about the effect of gun ownership on crime. How do you believe that gun ownership affects domestic violence rates, and how should that play into our consideration of gun policy? Starting with Mr. Blek. 60 seconds.
There is a correlation, which is why I'm pleased that we have the Speak for Safety program. Domestic violence is a personal restraining order. The Speak for Violence simply removes the gun from the equation. And I believe that if you understand that, I have practiced law in the area of family law for 30 plus years on my 45, that the most dangerous issues were the domestic and the gun being involved. We remove the gun, we lower the lethalness. Please do speakforsafety.org. Thank you.
So Dr. Lott?
How many of you can buy illegal drugs if you want to get them? Okay. The same groups that sell illegal drugs, the same gangs, the same groups that sell illegal guns. What I was trying to point out to you by showing you how heavily concentrated violent crime and murders were in the United States, those are drug gangs doing that. And the notion that you're going to get drug gangs not to have guns is about as likely as stopping them from getting illegal drugs to be able to sell. Here's the problem. If you really think somebody's a danger to other people, think of locking them up in some way. Just saying they can't legally get a gun is going to be as likely to stop them from legally getting a gun as stopping them from legally getting drugs to be able to use. And so this notion, the only people that get affected by these things are the most law-abiding citizens who aren't going to be breaking these laws to begin with.
Speaker's time is elapsed. So at this time, it is 11:41. So our panel is adjourned, but don't move just yet. 2 things we have to do. First of all, we want to thank profusely both of our speakers for being willing to And as a token of our gratitude for being willing to engage in this discussion, we would like to present each of them with a JSA mug. And Mr. Blek. So at this point, the panel is over. However, there were a lot of questions we were not able to get through. If you have questions about those questions or want to continue that discussion, first of all, there's a debate later in this convention that discusses whether restricting certain arms will potentially lead to violations of the Second Amendment. We encourage you to attend that debate and voice your views. Secondly, as I mentioned before, continue the discussion on gel, where you will have the opportunity to engage in a discussion with a constitutional law expert on the intersection of gun policy and the Second Amendment. So I encourage you to take advantage of that platform, and you know how to sign up. Just go to gel.com/JSA. Thank you all very much for attending the panel. And